Hello learners and welcome to your natural sciences lesson. So today we're dealing with the chemical reactions. We need to know what are chemical reactions and how do we even know what a chemical reaction is, and if whether a chemical reaction has occurred, we need to be able to tell. So to start, did you know that it's through a chemical reaction that you and I can be able to enjoy the fruits that we are eating? So in this lesson, we are going to be focusing on chemical reactions, what they are, how are they formed, and how can we tell if a chemical reaction has taken place. However, before we get to the crux of the lesson, we need to now set the goals of what we need to be achieving by the end of this lesson. So what I want you to know by the end of the lesson is the following. That firstly, you need to be able to explain a chemical reaction. Also, you need to be able to describe what happens to atoms in a compound and the bonds between the atoms during a chemical reaction. Furthermore, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify the reactants and products of a reaction. And then lastly, be able to write word equations for chemical reactions. So this is what I want us to be able to achieve by the end of the lesson. So now, in order to achieve those goals, we need to take the main idea and break it into two small pieces, whereby now we are going to be looking at the general general chemical reactions, and then also look at the evidence of a chemical reaction, looking at how can we tell if whether a chemical reaction has taken place. Not forgetting that the main idea of this entire lesson is based on the chemical reactions. Furthermore, what we already know about chemical reactions or reactions in general is that atoms in a compound, they are held together by chemical bonds. So we know that in any compound that we have, the atoms that are making up that particular compound, they are held together by chemical bonds. Again, that a chemical bond, that's now an attractive force that holds the atom together. So this chemical bond that you're talking about here, that holds the atoms in a compound together, that's an attractive force. So those are attractive forces that are holding the atoms together. In addition, a compound is a pure substance, which is made up of two or more different elements. So a compound, it is a pure substance, which is made up of two or more different elements. So now those elements are chemically bonded together in a fixed ratio. We can take an example of our common compound, which is H2O. The ratio that makes up the H2O is that for every 2 atoms of hydrogen, there must be 1 atom of oxygen. So the ratio is 2:1. So that's what we mean by a fixed ratio. We can't say that H3O is water, because H3O now becomes something else. So for us to have water, there must be a specific fixed ratio for the elements of hydrogen and oxygen chemically bonded to form water. So if the ratio is different, now they're going to form something else. In addition to that, the properties of the molecules in a compound, they are different from the properties of their atoms in their respective elements. That means whenever now a compound is being formed, the properties of the elements that made that compound are going to be different from the properties of the compound after a chemical reaction has taken place. We know that for us to be able to form or to produce the water, we need hydrogen, we also need oxygen. Now those are gases. However, we know that the water being produced from the reaction of those two is liquid. As we have said, the properties are different. The reactants, or what reacted in the beginning, were gases. Now, at the end of the reaction, what was produced, now that's going to be the liquid. So the properties are different. Furthermore, the properties in a compound are different from the properties of the reactants. As we have said, the properties of the compounds that are in the reactants, the ones that are reacting, are going to be different from the properties of the products that are going to be formed. So now, the properties of the reactants and the products, they are different. Now, with what we know, can we then be able to answer the following questions that we are given? The first question is, what holds the atoms together in a compound? We know that atoms in a compound are held together by chemical bonds. And those chemical bonds, we are saying that they are your attractive forces. So they are held together by chemical bonds, which are your attractive forces. right? Then question 2 says the following diagram shows how carbon, so we have carbon and oxygen react to form carbon dioxide. So the carbon and the oxygen, they are going to react to produce something, and that something is carbon dioxide. So now that means on this reaction that we're given, this diagram that we're given, we need to have a carbon and the oxygen producing the carbon dioxide. We also need to know that oxygen is an example of a diatomic molecule. So that means it exists as two. So now, it's not only just oxygen. We know that we have hydrogen also as a diatomic molecule. We have chlorine as a diatomic molecule. So now those elements or those atoms that can be found in the periodic table. We have oxygen that can be found in the periodic table. However, when you're writing it on its own, it needs to be written as O2. In the periodic table, you only just find O. Same thing applies with the chlorine and all the other diatomic molecules. So in the case that you are given here, carbon, oxygen reacting to form carbon dioxide, then obviously what's on the right hand side, that is going to be our carbon dioxide. And because we're saying that oxygen is a diatomic molecule that is made up of the same type of atoms, which being now the O. So that means when we are writing this, it is going to be O2, which is our oxygen, which then means the other one is going to be our carbon. So question now is, what are the reactants and what is the product in this reaction? The reactants are the substances which are undergoing a chemical reaction. So the ones that are going to react together to produce something. So the reactants in this chemical reaction, so reactants, we have carbon, not carbon dioxide, we have carbon and oxygen. So those are our reactants. And then the product, we only have one product in this reaction. And the product here is going to be, the carbon dioxide. Then question B says, write these names on the diagram. So already we have started to say that the product is your carbon dioxide, so that's the first name. And then the reactants, that's your oxygen, which is O2. And then this one, your other reactant is going to be carbon. So the chemical symbols for all of these things, we have C for carbon, and this is going to be our O2 as written there, and this is going to be our CO2. That means we have one atom of carbon and two atoms of oxygen. We also need to make sure that the chemical reaction is balanced. So that means that we need to make sure that on the left-hand side, we have the equal number of atoms as on the right-hand side. No? However, we're going to do that as we proceed with the lesson. So throughout this lesson, again, learners, we are going to be making use of certain words that are going to now enable us to explain what we mean by this concept of chemical reaction. So we need to know what a chemical reaction is. We also need to know what a chemical bond is. We also need to know what reactants are, and then also products, and then lastly, the subscripts. So throughout this lesson, we're going to be explaining what those words are and how do we use them in a chemical reaction. So before we start with the lesson, let's just go quickly for a short break, and I will see you just after this.